Okay, so today we have Jane Stevenson, who is the current manager of the Jisc Archives Hub service, which is a national aggregator of descriptions held over 380 archives in the UK. She's been a registered archivist for over 20 years experience and written articles and given papers related to online discovery, linked data, indexing standards, and other topics related to archival description. So with that, I will hand over to Jane.
Okay, thanks ever so much, Will. Great to be here. Right, I'm just going to get the sharing sorted. So, Will, just let me know if anything seems to be awry. Otherwise, I'll assume you can see and hear everything.
It's all good.
Great. Okay, so hi, everybody. It's great to be here, which we still say that, don't we? It's not physical anymore. But anyway, to be talking to you all. And maybe a slightly different perspective today, because I'm going to be talking a little bit about the Archives Hub, so an archival perspective. And what I thought I'd do is talk a little bit, reflect a little bit on an aggregation service that's been running for 20 years. It gave me an interesting chance to look back at some documents that I'd completely forgotten about. So look into our archive in a way, and think about what we've done. Did it work? Didn't it work? You know, and what's our direction been? And you know, so looking at the whole trajectory of the history of the service. Obviously, I can't cover everything because we've been going on an awful long time. So I've just picked out a few things with a particular focus on the data, on the metadata, and then very happy to take any questions you might have. So the Archives Hub. The Archives Hub is run by Jisc. So Jisc is described quite often as an ed tech. It's a not-for-profit organisation. And Jisc runs a lot of different services for education and research. So we have a library hub that a lot of you, I'm sure, will be familiar with. And we do a lot of other things through to things like Janet, the high-speed network for universities, a lot of advocacy, a lot of innovations work, all sorts of different things. But over the 20 years, we've actually moved from being part of a national data centre that Jisc used to run, which was actually at the University of Manchester. So when I started, I was part of something called MIMUS. And then we eventually moved into Jisc. But the Archives Hub has always been funded by Jisc. So we have always been a Jisc service. So what I'm going to do is put up a few slides and things that come from old presentations. So this is an old slide I've got here. So I haven't altered it or anything. I've just looked back and picked out a few. And I thought I'd start with a little bit about the technical side of the Archives Hub and where we've gone with that. And it's a funny thing I'd almost forgotten in a way, but actually one of the biggest changes that we made was we officially launched in 2001, and quite soon after that there was this idea that we should become distributed, and we actually moved from being centralized to having a setup that allowed us to be distributed in 2005. Now this was a really big thing, and we put a lot of resource and a lot of effort into it, and the whole back end needed to be changed in order to make us kind of distributed. So as it says here, the idea is that institutions that wanted to could host their own data. And in order to do that, they'd need a server with their own copy of our software, which was called Cheshire at the time. And this really seemed to be the right way to go. As I said, we put an awful lot of effort into it. And really, to put it bluntly, it turned out to be a mistake. It didn't work. It's one of the biggest things that we've done in terms of effort. that actually we ended up reversing. And in 2011, I've got something from a bulletin here, we went back to being centralized. So that was an interesting lesson. Fundamentally, we had very few institutions sign up to bespokes, and they didn't really have the technical expertise and the access to IT and to infrastructure and everything that they needed in order to run a server. Even when they got their servers up and running, if we did upgrades, they'd need to upgrade their versions of Cheshire, and that could take a painful amount of months for them to do it, because again, they needed IT to kind of help them. So it didn't really work very well. This is actually, it's funny looking at these again. I used to look at these an awful lot. So this is the model, the Distributed Archives Hub, where you can see, we were saying, like, we've got the central Archives Hub, and there's repository A, repository B. They've got their own kind of basically their own data. So the idea, it was twofold. The idea was to give our contributors control of their data. So obviously they'd have that if it was on their own servers. And the second idea was to give them a local search website. So I'm going to come back to those, because those were the two reasons why we kind of went distributed. Also, I kind of think there was a trend towards being distributed is a good thing. Actually, you know, it was the thing to do. But yes, so these technical updates were a problem, and actually search speeds were a particular problem as well. This is the main diagram that I used to spend a lot of time looking at and presenting on and describing, and I'd slightly forgotten about this one as well. So this is how it was all supposed to look, using protocols that were the thing to use kind of at the time. Quite a complex workflow, actually. And as I say, what we started to find was that search speeds were increasingly becoming a problem with this. One thing I would say, like with this diagram, you can see the bright yellow there, the kind of end user, and all the arrows pointing towards the end users. And I think one thing that we did do right is we were constantly thinking about pushing the data out and providing it, you know, to different people for different purposes. So I think that was a good principle. Yeah, I've got a screenshot here showing the Archives Hub. I'm going to show a little bit more the website, how it used to be. But it's interesting, when I looked back at this, it actually says in the interface, it may take a while for your description to appear. I can't imagine even putting that in now. You'd feel like, goodness, you can't do that. You certainly don't want to say it. But we had so many problems with slow search speeds. And in fact, in the old days, we had a summary description and a detailed description. And it was the detailed description that would take a long time. Within archives, as I'm sure many of you know, a description can be very large. It can have a very large table of contents with a number of levels within it. So you can get kind of up to 10 megabytes or more sometimes for a description, you know. So yeah, this was a real problem. And something I've put here, again, I found this in my archive, is we used to constantly do testing on search speed. So I don't know if anyone else found this used to be quite a big thing, and maybe hopefully isn't anymore. But I used to despair when I put in, you know, I put in London and it took 16 seconds for anything to appear. Luckily, people stayed with us. And I think maybe at that time, people were prepared to wait a little bit longer. You know, that things weren't as slick and weren't as fast on the internet. But obviously, it was changing, and this really wasn't acceptable. Looking back again on the technical side, it's interesting some of the protocols and standards that we kind of employed and introduced, and some of them kind of never really got going with us. Some of them fell by the wayside as things went on. And, you know, I think for all of us, whatever we're doing, it's like which protocols, which standards do you use? Are they going to be the right ones? Are they going to be sustainable? I can barely even remember SRU and SRW now, and all the SOAP protocol, I think it was. It was all very complicated. That's what I remember. Z3950, of course, which we don't have now, but did serve its purpose for many years, to be fair. So yeah, that's always a difficulty as you go on, isn't it? You know, which standards are going to be the right ones for us to adopt. Anyway, so from centralized to distributed, which really didn't work very well. I think even at the height, we maybe only had 7 or 8 institutions that actually became spokes, you know. Then we went back to centralized, but as I said, with these search beads, with this performance issue, with quite a complex, quite monolithic model for the Archives Hub, it became time to move to a whole different middleware and a whole different system, something that was going to be suitable for well, 2015-16 it was at the time, for the internet as it is now, I suppose. So we started thinking about this probably about 2014, and yeah, this was going to be going with a whole new provider and building up a whole new model. So I'm not going to go into all aspects of that, but I think it was obvious to us that the key thing, the basis for creating a model for an aggregator like ours, was going to be the workflow and having the right kind of workflow. So here I've got a diagram that we came up with our new supplier. So we went with Knowledge Integration, who have a lot of experience doing museum websites and working with museum data. They also do some work with library data and various other types of data. They didn't really have experience with archival data. They thought that they knew quite a lot about it. They didn't realise quite how difficult and complicated it would be. But hey ho, they signed up and they were willing. So yeah, this workflow was the first thing we worked on with them, and this was kind of the new paradigm for the Archives Hub, because we needed to think about bringing data in from different sources, and for it to run through this workflow, for it to be very clear what the workflow is. So, you know, data comes in. Is it a valid XML file? So that's the formatting that we use. Yes or no. If it's not, produce an error message. Do we have, is it from a supplier that we know about, a contributor? You know, if not, error message. If it is, go to the next stage. And very, very key within this, we wanted them to create a system whereby we could put in data transformations within the workflow, our own data transformations within their system and their workflow. So I don't know whether you can read it there, but we actually have 3 layers. There's global transformations that apply to all of the data that comes in. There's actually group transformations, and then individual contributor transformations. So we can apply all those 3 transformations to correct, modify the data, and then there's a validation process and so on and so forth. So this was at the heart of kind of what we did, because we wanted to ingest data at scale. And another really important thing is that we wanted good kind of version control, and that was something that we'd had issues with in the past. So yeah, version control was massive, and when the Archives Hub was set up, it wasn't something that we thought about. Well, I wasn't on it to start with, but that they thought about, really, because I think right at the very beginning, one of the first aggregators, you just thought about the data coming in, and you've got it in and you're showing it and it's on the website, and that's all great. And in fact, sometimes it seems amazing to me, but right at the beginning, we employed a data editor, and the data editor manually checked all of the descriptions, which now seems kind of slightly astonishing, but that was the role, that was the job. And in fact, I feel slightly embarrassed to say we used to change, kind of improve, you might say, in inverted commas, I don't know, descriptions before we put them on the hub. But doing that manually and not making it a repeatable process is going to create version control issues. And I can tell you, when we went onto the new system, after 15 years, we had some really, really big version control issues that we had to sort out because of that, because actually descriptions are updated a lot within the archives world. So you need something where people can revise and re-upload the description, and it will overwrite the old description. And that is a complex area that we had to think about and tackle. Moving on a bit to the data. It's interesting to me that when earlier on, the first 10 or 15 years with the Archives Hub, we used to talk about the data formatting that is behind the Archives Hub, and it's a form of XML called Encoded Archival Description, EAD. And we felt that we should teach our contributors and the archive world in general, I guess, about EAD. So we should expose these tags and the attributes, the building blocks of EAD to the contributors, and actually be very transparent about it. And we did that for quite a long time. And then we've gradually moved to working on the basis that we kind of hide that from the contributors, and contributors don't need to know about it. It's a selling point for us that they don't need to know about it. So that's been quite a big change for us. Now, we developed a cataloging tool, a tool for people to create descriptions. So you can see even here we called it EAD 2002 template, you know, and we had DSC and CO1 and things like that written into the interface. It was very basic. It actually required you to fill the whole lot in and save it. You couldn't, we didn't have a file store, so you couldn't half fill it in and come back to it. It was all or nothing, which was somewhat limiting, but still it was a start, you know. One of the good things we did at that time, although it was quite a basic data entry, right from the start of the Archives Hub, we thought that data structure, good structure, was important. And I think that's been really key to our success, that we did that right from the beginning. So I've just taken a screenshot here with that data entry tool. When you put in a personal name, we broke the name down in this kind of way right from the beginning. And most, even now, most commercial systems, they often don't do that, actually. An EAD itself didn't really lend itself to doing that, so we had to slightly hack the EAD in order to do it. And on the next slide here, this is where we're talking to our contributors about using this data entry tool. Again, we're using the EAD control access, the EAD tag. So we're not hiding the EAD vocabulary from them. And you can see there we've put in, the way we hacked actually was to use some mark for the main entry and sub entries, these A, Z, X, Ys. And we tried to explain that to them. I suspect they didn't always follow everything we were saying there. But it's really good that we did try and introduce that structure right from the off. That's been a strength of the Archives Hub. Then this template would generate the EAD. So yeah, it was this thing that we thought it was right to really promote the EAD and help our contributors to understand EAD. And as we went on, it kind of became obvious that wasn't the right way to go, that it's fine if you do know EAD and we can talk in that language, but most of our contributors don't, actually. when you use this cataloging tool, it was in the early days, I'd almost forgotten SGML. So render to SGML. I mean, we would never call a button render to XML or whatever now. Yeah. So yeah, as you can see, it was very basic and not dynamic, and you just had to email us your descriptions, you know. Nowadays, we have a very, very good cataloging tool which has a file store. You can do templates, you can save things. It's got a lot of authentication in it. It helps with controlled vocabulary. You can save and come back to them when you want. We have things like a VIAF ID lookup or a GeoNames lookup. So we're continuing in that vein of structure, vocabulary. So that's all been good. But we're hiding generally the EAD from our contributors. And the idea behind this cataloging tool is somebody who is not a trained archivist, may not be a trained librarian, can use it relatively easily. And the feedback that we've had is that is the case, and people do find it quite easy to use. So this is a screenshot just from our new cataloging tool, showing you that same, if you're going to enter a name either as the name of creator or as an index term. So again, it's quite similar, just with a bit more controlled vocabulary and a bit more sophistication. And you can look names up in VIAF, and we use the VIAF API. We can bring names in from VIAF. Quite a lot of our contributors actively use this as their data creation tool. Moving on to something a little bit different. September 2009, I found this, so this was interesting to me. We started to think, right, we need to start taking data in from archival management systems directly. So before that, it had been this idea of you kind of create it, you know, using our cataloging tool or whatever. But we started to realize we would need to take exports. And I can remember having the first meeting with colleagues from AIM25, the London aggregator, and kind of thinking, yeah, okay, this is great, and we'll get this cracked, and we'll move on, and we'll be able to take these exports and take data at scale. So we started that in 2009, and as it says here, it took until really 2016 for it to be something that I could say we now have this. So it actually was 6 or 7 years, and it was hard work. It's still ongoing, obviously. It's something that continues, but we focused on the CALM system quite a lot to begin with, because so many archives use CALM, and it was a long, slow trial and error process for us to be able to implement something whereby we can take descriptions at scale directly from CALM, also from AdLib and some other archival management systems. And in fact, now increasingly we're able to use APIs and harvest using OAI PMH as well, from systems such as the Atom system. So yeah, this is going great guns now, but took a lot longer than I thought it might. So this idea of workflow, you know, I said how the workflow was key, and how we had those data transformations that we could insert into the workflow. So we spent a lot of time thinking about that with our new system. And this diagram kind of shows you how we'd have our contributors on the left there, all dressed strangely similarly. So that represents the contributors. Their data comes in, and it comes through that workflow. And we've got these pipelines here. So that represents our global group and individual transformations of the data. So we will usually have a pipeline for data that comes from CALM, or that comes from Atom or AdLib or Sutron, or some of the new ones that we've come across, whatever, Archive Space, for example. And they're flexible, so we can add bits into them as and when we want to. So some of them are more complex. The very straightforward one is where the data comes from our own cataloging tool, because we know that it's good data. And so this is a repeatable process. So if the contributor revises, it goes through the same process. So we can make changes, that's okay, because if they send us a revised copy, the same changes will happen. So no problems with version control. And these pipelines are about making some corrections to make sure that the data is valid. We do also enhance the data, but we're very transparent about how we do that. And it's not making kind of changes to their content, but it's things like if they've put in just a display date, we have scripts that can take that and create a date for date searching, a standardized, normalized date for date searching. Or if they've just put in the language, we have scripts that can put in the ISO language code. And there's lots and lots of different scripts that we have that can do these kinds of things. And this has been hugely, hugely important, because when we get a new contributor, quite often there's a little bit of, what's the data like? Well, we can deal with XYZ in our pipelines. We can deal with these things for you, so you don't need to worry about them. And then that hopefully minimizes what they have to change in their data. And that's really important, because if we get somebody saying, yes, I'd like to contribute, and then we say, you've got this massive amount of work to do to make your data valid, it's going to be quite off-putting. So we're trying to do what we can for them, but obviously there's certain things we kind of can't do, like say duplicate identifiers. You know, they have to sort those out, for example. With this workflow, again, you know, I said earlier about the data out, and the data out has continued to be a really important focus for us. Now we have an Elasticsearch API, we still have our AI PMH, which is still really useful, and sending this interoperable data out to different places is really, really important for our success as a service, I think. So in fact, going back to what I said about the Distributed Archives Hub, we now can provide those local interfaces to our contributors. We call them microsites, and that data we use the API for those as well. So we do provide that, even though the service is centralized. The data can go to the Archives Wales and Scottish Archives portal that is being developed, and the Archives Portal Europe. I think I've just got a screenshot here to show you the Archives Portal Europe. So if you contribute to the Archives Hub, we can set up harvesting, and the data can go through to the Archives Portal Europe. So using EAD has been quite good in that way, because it's a format for data exchange. And it's really good to be on a European aggregator as well as the UK aggregator. How are we doing? Okay. And you know, the other thing I said about this distributed system that didn't really work, but we wanted to give people control of their data, and we've also done that because Knowledge Integration supply us with this system. It's called the SIM, CIIM, and we give our contributors a login to the SIM, so they can see, they can control their data, they can publish and unpublish their data. Some of them upload their data directly to the SIM, so we don't need to get involved at all. So they do kind of now have that that control of their data, and that is working very well. So contributors don't have to engage with the SIM. You know, I said to you about it's important that if they don't feel confident and they don't have the skills or knowledge, they don't have to do that. But others of them, they like to work like that and upload their data directly and look at what the error reports are and work on their data and so forth. So it's a whole range, really. So I've just written a little bit here, was EAD the right choice, which I think is kind of an interesting question. And I think it was. When we started the Archives Hub, we said, right, encoded archival description, we'll use this very new XML format for archival descriptions. But as I said, it's become a little bit more like, it's not the format, it's not the be all and end all. It's a way to take data in and it's a way to send data out. So actually within the Archives Hub, we actually convert it to JSON, and JSON gives us more flexibility with our back end, and that's what we work with. So EAD still has this role for data in, data out, which is really good. So I said about the local interfaces. So the API that we have that provides data to these local interfaces. Now, learning from what we done in the past, we decided we can provide local interfaces. These are actually for members only, so for Jisc members only. So it's the one thing the Archives Hub does that is actually just for Jisc members. But it's just a very template-based approach. So you can see it just recreates the Archives Hub with some different colours and a few different images. So it's incredibly easy for us to set them up. And it doesn't involve us in a lot of support work, which we wouldn't really have the resource to do. So we've got, I think, a dozen of our members that have these local interfaces. Oh, I did say I'd show you just a few screenshots to show the development of the website. So yeah, this is quite funny, isn't it? This is from 2001. I think this is just before the actual official launch, to be fair, but I'm not sure that you'd have a homepage that looks quite like this anymore. Interesting though, 3,308 finding aids searchable on the hub. So just starting out. But I love the fact that we've put the news and been very specific about stuff that now I'm not entirely sure that we'd put on the website quite like this. But anyway, that was right at the start. 4 or 5 years later, we had a new website. This one worked quite well for quite a long time. The thing that I noticed here, which I'd forgotten about, I don't know if any of you had this, but we used to use something called frames. And you can see there's a little tick box for if you don't have frames, and frames used to be a nightmare if people didn't have them, because it was the way that you used to have, you know, 2 sides to your interface, which you really need for archival descriptions. Yeah, using frames. Well, frames have gone now, thank goodness. Then we moved to a new website in 2009, and we started, you know, there was more images, trying to make it a little bit more user-friendly, that kind of thing. So that worked quite well, looks reasonably nice. This is actually a screenshot showing you a description from 2012, so not that long ago. Here you can see we were still putting dates of revisions and things. So that's the sort of thing we tend to hide now. We tend to try and make it a little bit more slick. Interestingly, where it's held, so you can see 4 rows down, you've got held at University of Birmingham. That's something that we've increasingly needed to make more prominent, actually. But it's interesting that we've put a collection level description, and we've also put level of description fonts, which I kind of hate because I think most people in the world don't know what that means. So we've moved away from doing that kind of thing. Digital content. So we are now working very much with digital content, and this is a screenshot showing what I believe was the first digital object that we ingested. So this is how we did it. And we didn't say much about it, and they were quite hidden away, because when you start with digital content, you can't say on the homepage, we have digital content, and you've got kind of 11 images, you know. So we had to wait and bide our time and try and, you know, increase the number of images. It's quite difficult to attract people to add images when you're not displaying them very nicely, but you can't bring them to the fore until you have enough to display. So that was an interesting thing. Currently we have 87,545 images, so we're doing okay. On the current website, all we have is digital content. Yes, I only want to see digital content. No, I don't. That's it. That's the indication that there's digital content, if you like. So it's still not particularly at the forefront. So you say, yes, I want to see digital content. You come to a description as here, and you see the image, and you can click and enlarge the image. but it's still very basic. It's just an image and you can enlarge it. We are now in our innovations moving towards using IIIF, which many of you will know about, the image interoperability framework, and we're doing work with some participants and contributors around actually starting to use IIIF and bring our images to the forefront, because now we feel there's enough images on the hub that we can start to do that. So that's going to be quite exciting. Right. When we make website changes, very much around the feedback we get. So this is just a screenshot of a survey. So we ask people what they want and really try and use the feedback that we get from various channels to develop the website over time. Yeah, so I said this material is held at, and it was just one line in that block of text. Now, our new site, which is due to go live in about 3 or 4 weeks, we've gone from this material is held at to this material is held at. And the reason we've done that is because we get a lot of emails from people saying, I want to see XYZ, and they assume that we are the holders of the material. So where the material is held has become more and more prominent. And I think in the new site, it's about as prominent as we can possibly make it. So we're hoping that that will help with the end user experience. Right, so just wrapping up, I had a quick look at some of the workshops. This is a workshop from 2009, so quite a long time ago. And it's interesting and maybe quite heartening to see that what people saw as the strengths and benefits of being on the Archives Hub, they're very similar to what we have today. And this idea of being some more supportive and being a community, being collaborative, being a forum, that's been the strength of the Archives Hub, and contributors have felt that to be the case, which is absolutely great, So it very much feels like we are still something that archives need and want. The use of the Archives Hub over time has continued to increase. Pretty much month on month it has increased. So this is just a screenshot from way back. So you can see 2005, maybe kind of 40,000 page views at a stretch, and then what we get today, which is it's much greater in terms of page views. Having said that, although this looks quite spectacular, a lot of these people are coming in from Google and other search engines, and there's still an issue over whether they come in and go, oh, this isn't what I want, and leave again, of course. But you do want to be open to search engines, and maybe a percentage of the people that come in via Google will be like, blimey, I didn't know this existed, and this is exactly what I want. That's what we tend to find. So that's all going well. So yeah, the value of the Archives Hub. I think we have a very sound technical basis now, and this architecture, the workflow, is really key to us. Being open to search engines, and having been open for a long time, means we do quite well in rankings now. Those pipelines were absolutely key for us to expand at scale and in a sustainable way. And we have data requirements, but as I explained, we try to put the level of entry somewhere that is practical, that is achievable, but at the same time have a certain quality of description. So it's just getting that right is what we've tried to do. And we work with contributors to kind of do that. We are now running in such a way that we have more time for innovation, and that's really kind of important to us. So what has worked well? I've just put a couple of things. I mean, I could have put a great long list, but just to sum up, I think it's good that we had EAD. It's really good that we started thinking about structure early on. The pipelines and the community and working with standards generally has been good in order to exchange data and work with other people. What hasn't necessarily worked so well? Well, the distributed system didn't work. Trying to be transparent and use the language of EAD didn't work with most contributors. And if you ask too much of contributors, which I think we've sometimes pushed that way, we've had to come back a bit from that and really understand where they are and the sort of knowledge that they've got. And I've put working with standards because not so much that it hasn't worked so well, but standards can be both a blessing and a curse, as I'm sure a lot of you know. So I think you need them and they're good, but they can sometimes actually hamper you around maybe your innovations work and things. So that's why good structure, I think, is really important, as well as standards. And that's me done. So I'm going to escape out of that. And where am I? Hopefully press the right button.